never seen before. On November 8th, 2010, MK Dasher reclaimed the PRB champion. At this point, he had 16 world records, well behind Thomas's 26. But in 2011, he went on a world record spree, reminiscent of what Thomas himself did back in 2008. It was world record after world record. That August, he passed Thomas's world record total and never looked back. Even when he wasn't setting world records, he was still cleaning up his timesheet, improving his slower ranked times. Frapp Snowland 3-lap, for instance, one of his weakest times in 10th place, he lowered by a full second, a massive amount for a player of his skill level, and good for 2nd place. MK Dasher now had a big average finish lead, in addition to a big world record lead. He was easily considered the game's premier player, and the only guy who could maybe compete with him at this point was Thomas. But once again, he was nowhere to be seen. Thomas played Mario Kart DS for years, and now that chapter of his life was behind him. So, MK Dasher only had one real competitor during this period, a player named Rupa. Rupa appeared essentially out of nowhere in 2011. He joined the site and almost instantly began setting world records. But perhaps more impressive than his driving skills was his innovation. He implemented small pieces of tech that helped him save time in ways nobody else was doing. For example, in Mario Kart DS, you lose a small amount of speed if you steer without drifting. Now, normally this isn't an issue, since you're drifting through the whole race, but right at the start, you typically have to turn to set up your first mini-turbo. So to avoid a slowdown here, Rupa started doing a neutral hop. He hopped and turned in the air just before landing, letting him change his direction while preserving his forward momentum. He also started doing neutral hops at the end of some laps. After the last mini-turbo, instead of steering to face the finish line, Rupa started hopping without turning to preserve his forward speed. These were small time saves, but when combined with incredible driving, Rupa was able to build up a number of world records. He peaked in May 2012, with an impressive 13 of them. But just like Thomas Bolton, there were a number of courses he didn't care to play, so he was never much of a threat to take the champ title from MK Dasher. Then in 2013, Mario Kart DS entered a very inactive period. The game was 8 years old at this point, and its popularity had gradually died down while games like Mario Kart Wii took over. During its heyday in 2006, nearly 1,800 world records were set across the year. In 2013, that number was down to just 44. Most players had moved on, and even MK Dasher was playing much less than he used to. Despite the inactivity, players still set a handful of records, but they didn't put much of a dent in MK Dasher's record total. And that was the state of Mario Kart DS in the spring of 2014. MK Dasher was still the champ, but overall activity was very light. Perhaps the game just needed some kind of a spark. Other than snaking, Mario Kart DS had a reputation as one of the least broken Mario Karts. Only 3 out of its 32 tracks had shortcuts, and most of those were very minor. But now, 7 years after the last shortcut discovery, shortcut number 4 was found, on Mario Circuit. On April 9th, 2014, Folk and his friend Toa found that by driving toward this wall with speed, then hopping on this raised slope, you could get enough air to land on top of the wall. It was quickly found that you could clear the wall entirely and use this as a shortcut, cutting out a bend to save about 1.5 seconds. Now, this wasn't a very big time save, but it was enough that you had to get a time with this shortcut, or else your rank would fall way behind and hurt your average finish. And sure enough, within days, MK Dasher was back and setting new records on Mario Circuit. His first submissions to the site in over a year. It rejuvenated his love of the game, and he began playing more than ever, like grinding for the first sub-1 on Sky Garden. He even found his own new shortcut on Rainbow Road, the Loop shortcut. a faster and easier replacement for the rail shortcut. MK Dasher was more active than he'd been in years. His world record lead had increased, and his average finish was leaps ahead of anyone else. At this point, he'd already been the champ for nearly 4 years, and although he'd faltered slightly while taking a break, his lead was once again growing and he'd separated from others again. How long could this go on? Could anybody catch MK Dasher? Then, in June 2014, there was an unexpected post on the forums. Thomas Bolton was back.
Deadpool and Wolverine. She's coming with us. No, she's not. Oh, yes.
If you're temporarily working in or visiting Australia, get overseas visitor health cover from the international health insurance experts. Allianz Care.
Over the last 4 years, Thomas had barely touched Mario Kart DS. But since the game's official Wi-Fi servers were shutting down, Thomas wanted to come back and play a bit more. And this time, he was going to focus heavily on playing time trials. Now look, Thomas had been a dominant champ back in 2008, but that was years ago. He'd been passed up by MK Dasher. How good could Thomas be in 2014? Could he still set world records? Thomas Bolton came back out of nowhere, set 8 world records in just over a week, and beat MK Dasher to take back the champ title. His skills hadn't gone anywhere. In fact, he was playing better than he'd ever been. This was despite not playing competitively at all in over 4 years. Although he'd resisted shortcuts in the past, Thomas decided to try the new ones on Mario Circuit and Rainbow Road. And he actually posted respectable times, as high as 6th place on Rainbow Road and 3rd place on Mario Circuit. But even more important, Thomas was directly outdueling MK Dasher on some of these records. For instance, in June, MK Dasher had set a new lap record on Donut Plains with some minor strategy changes. But when Thomas returned, he decided to play it too and beat the time that MK Dasher had just posted. He got the record, and it ultimately helped him pass MK Dasher for champ. Thomas and MK Dasher were both extremely active over the following months, as they each set world record after world record. These two stood head and shoulders above the rest. They had 41 records between them, while nobody else had more than 8. This was a beautiful period for Mario Kart DS. The two best players the game had ever seen, battling it out and trading the champ title back and forth. But all good things must come to an end. While the summer months of 2014 had rampant record activity, by the end of the year things had slowed down. And by early 2015, the dust had more or less settled. Thomas was just ahead of MK Dasher as the PRB champion, but they were now both inactive, sitting alone at the top, holding a majority of the game's records. 2015 was another quiet year for Mario Kart DS. Thomas was in the middle of his 7th reign as champ, but he wasn't actively defending his title. So, the door was open for somebody new to make a move. And that summer, guess who made a charge toward the top spot?
Motherfucking games.
That's right, it was Ben Stoneman. You might remember Ben from 2008, when he got fairly close to Thomas but couldn't quite get there. That was kind of the story for Ben. Always in the top 5, but never the champ. But with both players ahead of him out of the way, Ben saw a chance to move up. He set a number of PRs that beat Thomas but not MK Dasher, causing MK Dasher to briefly move ahead of Thomas for champion. But Ben kept going, eyeing the top spot for himself. That October, he took the Luigi's Mansion lap and 3-lap records, and it was enough to push him over the top. For the first time in 5 years, someone other than Thomas or MK Dasher was the PRB champion of Mario Kart DS. Now, part of the reason Ben was on top was because of other players in activity, but he was still an incredible player in his own right. Of the 35 records set in 2015, Ben did more than half of them. He also set 21 total records during his reign as champ, and on some courses he was flat out dominant, like Luigi's Mansion and Yoshi Circuit. He lowered the records repeatedly on these courses, and for years nobody could touch him, not even Thomas or MK Dasher. Throughout 2016, there was very little movement. Ben was the only active top player, and he had a small but stable lead in average finish. But it's worth noting that Ben was considered a little weaker than the champs right before him. Thomas and MK Dasher were both inactive, and he'd taken advantage of the opportunity. Ben still had a very strong timesheet, but he didn't have that many world records. It was generally believed that if either Thomas or MK Dasher came back, Ben's status as champion would be very vulnerable. And then, for the first time in 2 years, MK Dasher set a world record. It was on GameCube Luigi Circuit, thanks to a new strategy developed by Toa. In the description, he said he had a bit of free time this summer to play Mario Kart DS again, but don't expect a long comeback. Well, 2 weeks later...
50,000 units? No worries.
More like many worries. Fiona needs more staff, more stock.
More everything.
Fiona needs Westpac Business Solutions. Ready when you are.
Heroes will be born. What are you prepared to do? Underdogs will rise. And stories will never be forgotten.
Fuck is that?
Is watching.
Oh,
Are you ready?
God.
Get it all on Disney Plus.
What is that?
After world records on Luigi's Circuit and Luigi's Mansion, MK Dasher had
Boy,
beaten
what
Ben
is
Stoneman. And over the next month, he set records on Peach Circuit, Choco Island 2, Koopa Beach 2, and Rainbow Road. MK Dasher hadn't missed a beat in the last 3 years. In fact, it seemed like he was playing even better than before. He was setting world records with an ease that he'd never had. By late August, he was up to 22 world records. That fall, his world record quest continued. MK Dasher was gaining record after record, and he just kept going. This was MK Dasher at his absolute best. He had no challengers. This continued through all of 2018, and by June of 2019, MK Dasher held 35 world records, the most records any one person had held since Thomas Bolton in 2010. Of these 35 records, 2 of them stood out above the rest, because they were the 2 longest lasting world records in the game's history. The first was MK Dasher's Shroom Ridge 3-lap record, set way back in August 2009. Shroom Ridge is a uniquely difficult course. First off, it's one of the longest tracks in the game. It also has cars all over that you need to avoid, making ideal lines harder. There's upward and downward slopes that affect mini-turbos, and it's extremely hard to keep PRB so you can drive over the grass in the middle section. In August 2009, MK Dasher got a 137.856, a really good race that took risky lines between the vehicles and the wall, and it stood as the world record throughout the long reigns of Thomas Bolton, Ben Stoneman, and MK Dasher himself. Players got close over the years, but nobody could quite get there. Finally, in September 2020, Max beat the record after an 11-year reign on top, only for MK Dasher to beat him back just 7 days later. His other long-lasting record was the Sky Garden Lap record from February 2010. This is one of the few tracks in the game with a shortcut. You have to keep PRB, press R to hop at the last moment, then shroom and precisely navigate to recover speed. MK Dasher was easily the best player at this shortcut, which is why his 18.757 lap also stood for 11 years. In May 2021, it was finally beaten by Boreas, and this time it took MK Dasher longer than 7 days to beat him back. It took him 8 days. Nobody else came close to MK Dasher. In the past, even when he was the champ, he had competition like Thomas or Ben. But now, there was really nobody. He held a majority of world records, and had been the champ for the past 3 years with a massive lead. MK Dasher seemed untouchable. But who are we kidding? We've seen this before. No matter how dominant the champ, no matter how amazing the player, nobody stays on top forever. On the evening of September 20th, 2020, a player named Mikiri posted in Discord that he'd stumbled upon somebody new. This person's name was Taiga, and he just posted a video of a 156 on Waluigi Pinball. That was an incredible time, and good for second place overall. Nobody had heard of this guy before. Taiga hadn't submitted to the site and showed no progression of his times. There was just a near world record sitting on his YouTube page, with no elaboration. Over the next week, a couple more of these elite level times popped up on Taiga's channel, including a second place time on Sky Garden. And then, on September 25th, Taiga uploaded another one. He had just beaten MK Dasher's Bowser Castle world record. That same day, he posted a video scrolling through his PRs on each course, and it showed that he had an elite time on nearly every track in the game, including 4 world records. Who was this guy? Where did he come from? Taiga had just suddenly popped up with no progression or prior community contact, and beaten 4 world records held by the game's very best players. These were veterans who'd been playing the game for years, and he'd beaten their times like it was nothing. Oh, and one other important thing to note, Taiga was 11 years old. Taiga's videos were uploaded by his parents, who said in the description that he was in 6th grade. And most of the community realized this had to be a prank. There was no way an 11-year-old could come along and single-handedly take down times that a community of veterans had played for years to achieve. Right? I mean, some of these guys have been playing since before Taiga was allegedly born. These videos were either faked or played by some veteran who was trolling the community. But when they asked for proof, Taiga responded with a hand cam video showing it really was him playing. This was actually real. An 11-year-old had somehow become one of the best Mario Kart DS players on Earth, and he was beating records that were set when he was a toddler. Although there was limited footage of him driving, top players could tell that Taiga had inhuman consistency. He was also playing with the 3DS Circle Pad, which was virtually unheard of among top players. Taiga only had 4 world records, but it was clear that he had the potential to get way more. Perhaps even enough to rival MK Dasher. But nobody knew what would happen next. Would Taiga fade away, or keep setting records? Well, Taiga did indeed keep playing. By the end of 2020, he'd increased his record total from 4 to 6. It wasn't the world record domination that some had predicted, but he was still hanging on to his fair share of records. Maybe climbing all the way to the top was unrealistic for 11-year-old Taiga, but he'd carved out a niche for himself in the Mario Kart DS community. Or maybe he was just getting started.
You're a family man, but a kid at heart. Some things are just worth paying for. You put some money aside to get away for a while and spend some time in the sun with the fam. But I think you might be scaring the kids. At least you're good at money.
Now, more than money.
Taiga had ascended the mountain. After 9 months of heavy playing in 2021, he'd nearly made it to the top. All the while, MK Dasher was playing and setting his own world records, but he kept losing ground to Taiga. For every record that he set, Taiga got multiple others, and the result was the complete erosion of his world record lead. On September 17th, 2021, it officially happened. Taiga passed MK Dasher's record count. But was this enough to make him the champ? How did his average finish compare to MK Dasher? Well, overall, Taiga had an incredible timesheet. If he didn't have the record on a course, he was usually in second place. One notable exception. These were his Moo Moo Farm ranks. Taiga was pretty disconnected from the rest of the community and seemed to not care at all about average finish. So, even though he passed MK Dasher in nearly every metric, Moo Moo Farm prevented him from officially being champ. MK Dasher still held the crown. By late 2021, MK Dasher gave up trying to compete with Taiga. He realized it was a pointless endeavor. Instead, he focused on grinding individual tracks he enjoyed, like Rainbow Road, lowering these records over and over. He knew his champ status could disappear at any moment. Meanwhile, Taiga kept playing too, setting new records while also lowering ones he already had. By mid-2022, his world record lead had grown, despite still not technically being the champ. And then, in October 2022, it happened. Taiga played Moo Moo Farm. It was far from perfect. On his 3-lap time, he missed a mini turbo and hit a wall at the end. But his driving was still incredible overall. He improved his times from outside the top 150 to 3rd place. And finally, it was made official. Taiga was the champion of Mario Kart DS. Could MK Dasher respond? Well, in 2023, he went all in, doing everything he could to close the gap between himself and Taiga. But no matter what MK Dasher did, he remained 5 to 10 world records behind Taiga. Even when he managed to beat a few of Taiga's records, Mario Circuit 1, Donut Plains 1, Figure 8 Circuit, Taiga always beat him back in a matter of weeks. It was reminiscent of what Sasha did to Thomas back in 2007. Before MK Dasher knew it, his progress was always undone. He then turned to cleaning up his timesheet instead of chasing world records. This helped close the average finish gap somewhat, but Taiga still had a comfortable lead. This continued throughout all of 2023. Both players were active and improving their PRs. By early 2024, Taiga had been on top for a year and a half, and despite MK Dasher's best effort, he hadn't been able to pose much of a threat. That was the status quo, all the way until April 2024, when there was a revolution.
Congrats, Winnie. You've made the squad.
Oh my god! Wait, what?
Combat with all of you all the way.
Yes!
A delicious Starbucks coffee feels like it's more than coffee. It's Starbucks by Nespresso.
On April 5th, 2024, someone new popped up in the Mario Kart DS Discord server, Zumo de Papaya. Right away, he started asking about a potential glitch on Luigi's Mansion. He was wondering if it was somehow possible to bounce high enough to clip through the wall and down to the floor below. Players had already seen bounces like this before. They weren't consistent enough or big enough for anything meaningful. But Zumo was an experienced glitch hunter. He knew what he was doing. And as he kept experimenting with different angles and steering, his bounces began to get higher. Other players started to take notice, and one named Guan began experiments of his own. A few hours later, Guan posted that he had done it. He bounced over the wall and clipped down to later in the track. This was Mario Kart DS's first new shortcut in more than 10 years, and it was about to kick off a revolution of new shortcuts, all revolving around this one technique, the Super Bounce. Here's how it's done. You must angle your cart back in the air while falling, press R on the frame you land next to a wall, then steer perpendicular to said wall. This allows you to get massive air, and potentially skip certain sections of the track. The Super Bounce opens up the door to many new shortcuts, but it's limited somewhat because of the game's checkpoint system. Each track has a number of key checkpoints you must drive through, and if you miss one, the lap won't count. So, if your Super Bounce causes you to miss a key checkpoint, you won't complete a lap upon crossing the finish line. Ultimately, Zumo, Guan, and others collaborated to find 3 new shortcuts using the Super Bounce. The first new RTA viable shortcuts since 2014. The first was on Luigi's Mansion, which you've already seen. It saves about 1.5 seconds and is also the hardest of the 3 shortcuts. You can see you're not skipping any key checkpoints by cutting out this section of the track, so the lap counts. The second shortcut was on Delfino Square, and used an idea theorized years ago by a player known as Nine. You jump off the lip, hit the bridge to bounce and tilt your cart back, then super bounce over the wall to skip a section of the track. Just like Luigi's Mansion, this shortcut also saves about 1.5 seconds. But the biggest time save of the 3 shortcuts, and also by far the easiest, was on Waluigi Pinball. It's performed after a long fall from a zipper, and by using a mushroom, you can make it all the way to the bottom of the pinball machine. It saves close to 9 seconds per lap, blowing the other 2 shortcuts out of the water. The Waluigi Pinball shortcut was first hit in the world record by iMathy on April 13th. iMathy is a Mario Kart shortcut aficionado, who's hit shortcut world records in several Mario Kart games. It only made sense that he'd be the first to hit this one in Mario Kart DS. But what about our world champions? They were used to incredibly fast racing without shortcuts. How did they adapt to the Super Bounce? Well, Taiga did briefly take the Waluigi Pinball lap record, but there's no footage of him ever using the shortcuts on Delfino Square or Luigi's Mansion. He did manage to hit a new lap shortcut on GameCube Luigi Circuit, but for the most part, he's stuck to non-shortcut racing recently. MK Dasher, on the other hand, well, he got good at the Super Bounce. At times, he's held all 6 shortcut records across the 3 Super Bounce courses. He's mastered the shortcuts themselves, and when combined with his driving skills, he can outmatch nearly any player in the world on these courses. The shortcut revolution has given MK Dasher a leg up on Taiga, and as a result, it's brought him right back into the competition. On April 14th, MK Dasher took the champ title from Taiga, and ever since then, they've been trading it back and forth. As of now, MK Dasher is officially the PRB champ. He holds a very slight lead over Taiga, thanks in large part to his shortcut records. Their rivalry is stronger than ever. They hold a combined 61 out of the game's 64 world records. And as exciting as their futures will be, it's just a small part of Mario Kart DS's history. These are the best players to ever touch Mario Kart DS. Their records, their struggles, and their stories live on, and they'll remain a part of this game's legacy forever. Thanks for watching. For a behind-the-scenes look at how I made this video and storylines that I couldn't include, join my Patreon page. I only charge when I upload a video. Thanks.
Fancy Feast. More ways to show your love with so many delicious recipes.
Summoning Salt merchandise is now available on Teespring. Check out the storefront right below the video. Enjoy! One of the fastest growing speedruns of the last few years is New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Close to 1,000 runs are on the leaderboard, a mark that not many games have reached. Naturally, competition at the top level is impressive, because not many people can call themselves a world record holder. A world record demands near perfection, honing in skills that come after thousands of hours of gameplay. Few people have gotten to that level, but those who have etched their place in speedrunning history. This is the world record history of New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Let's start up here, at the beginning. New Super Mario Bros. Wii was released on November 12th, 2009. Normally it takes months or even years before a speedrunning scene develops around the game. For New Super Mario Bros. Wii, it took 4 days. People nearly instantly gathered in the Speed Demos Archive forums to route the game for a speedrun. In the following weeks, times of 45 minutes and 35 minutes were claimed by MWL and Chronorox, respectively, although neither have video proof. For the next several months, runner UC Pro would both route the game and complete speedruns, and in May 2010 he claimed the 2605, but once again he didn't record it. To get to the first recorded run, we have to jump to May 2011, when Riker Z uploaded this run, a time of 26 minutes and 56 seconds. Riker Z started in World 1. Level 1-1 is quite straightforward, where you want to run and jump through to get to the end as fast as possible. However, there are subtle optimizations you can make. Sliding down the hills gives you a slight boost of speed, and running through the checkpoint is the fastest way to power up. Riker Z also picked up the propeller mushroom for later. In 1-2, he tilted the Wii remote to create downward slopes he could quickly run down, and picked up a star midway through, which increases your running speed. In 1-3, Riker Z used the propeller mushroom to fly up and access the secret exit, which unlocked the cannon to take him to World 5. In 5-1, he had to deal with the water in the latter half, and he simply fell in and swam as quickly as he could. It slowed him down by several seconds. After 5-1, you're forced to run into the Piranha Plant on the overworld map, where Riker Z collected the 8 Toad Balloons, albeit with a bit of a slowdown. You then have a choice of either playing 5-2 or 5-3, and Riker Z picked 5-2. It's a pretty straightforward stage, where you bounce on top of wigglers and run through the rest. Next was the World 5 Fortress, a vertical stage where having the propeller suit helps immensely. Riker Z was able to propeller up from platform to platform, then defeated Iggy with 3 jumps on his head. The next stage was 5-4. This stage is intended to be an auto-scroller, where you ride on this raft while enemies rain down from these platforms above. It's designed to be long and slow, not ideal conditions for a speedrun. So, instead, Riker Z decided to implement the first game-breaking trick of the run.
Get overseas visitor health cover from the international health insurance experts, Allianz Care.
This was first posted by UC Pro just 2 weeks after the game came out, and takes some practice to get right. but thanks to the propeller suit and navigating and jumping at the correct times, it's possible to skip the entire stage by jumping on the platforms and blocks. Riker Z did so beautifully, making a few brief hesitations but still flying through. After 5-4 came the World 5 Ghost House, where Riker Z took the secret exit once again to unlock another cannon, this time taking him to World 8. The fastest path through World 8 consists of 5 levels: 8-1, 8-2, 8-7, the airship, and finally Bowser's Castle. In 8-1, Riker Z had to deal with randomly falling meteors, and he got hit twice. He powered back up, only to intentionally take damage again later on to boost through some lava. In 8-2, Riker Z once again took the secret exit to unlock 8-7, a hidden level that bypasses most of World 8. 8-7 itself is a long stage consisting of jumping from spine coaster to spine coaster. World 8's airship isn't an auto-scroller like in previous games. Instead, Riker Z had to run through and traverse it as quickly as possible. He picked up the propeller shroom again to jump across big gaps instead of having to wait and slowly bring the platforms down. The Bowser Jr. fight was simple, hitting him with 3 bombs that he dropped. And finally, there was Bowser's Castle. Riker Z used the propeller suit quite a bit to navigate at the start, which isn't always the fastest. The last part of the run is the escape, where you have to guide Bowser's heat-seeking fireballs to destroy the path in front of you, then navigate through an obstacle course to the finish. In all, Riker Z finished after 26 minutes and 56 seconds. It was a good starting point. There were some obvious slowdowns that could be cleaned up, but no huge mistakes or deaths, and the video quickly went viral on YouTube. Over the next several months, Riker Z would continue running the game to push his time lower. At the end of 2011, he posted his first new time, a 25:49. This run actually saved time over the 26:56 in every single stage. Most of his strategies were the same, but were better executed. In 5-1, for instance, he dealt with the water much better, jumping out earlier and just barely being able to make it to the end. One of the biggest time saves was in 8-1, where he managed to avoid getting hit by the meteors and didn't have to power back up. But the best improvement was in Bowser's Castle. He guided the fireballs much better in the escape, using 9 fireballs to clear the path instead of 18 in his old record. In 2012, Riker Z would get 2 more records, a 25:31 and a 25:27. These runs both optimized existing strategies and utilized new ones. In the escape,